Well, let me introduce our speaker to you this evening. Ken Myers, as many of you know, is the host and producer of the Mars Hill Audio Journal, which is a bi-monthly audio magazine that explores the significance of major cultural trends for Christians who are striving to be in the world but not of the world. And every 2 months, around 20,000 listeners from the United States and from abroad tune in. And for 8 years prior to this, Ken was a producer and editor for National Public Radio, working for much of that time as arts and humanities editor for the 2 news programs, Morning Edition and All Things Considered. And you may not know that for a number of years, Ken and his family lived right here in the greater Richmond area in Powhatan County, which is where Mars Hill Audio was started back in 1992. So we're very happy to have Ken with us, and please welcome with me from Mars Hill Audio, Ken Myers.
Thank you, Chris. It is good to be here. It's been almost 12 years since we moved from Powhatan County west and north to Greene County north of Charlottesville, and 21 years, I guess, since we moved to Powhatan from Philadelphia at a time when I was hoping to see a study center ministry of some sort be launched in the Richmond area, and I was actually we actually had thought of moving to Charlottesville originally and decided not to, because we knew there was a study center there and we wanted to be part of a ministry like that at some point. And so it's very exciting to be able to help kick off this project. I'm kind of the warm-up band for Amy, actually, I realized. She's going to give all the really important and practical stuff tomorrow, and I'm going to provide some theological, historical, and theoretical context for her material, and she's eminently qualified to speak on this subject. When Chris originally invited me to speak here, my original thought was, I'm not the right person for this because, first of all, I typically don't do well in giving people counsel about how to cope with bad situations. He wanted me to talk about, how do we respond to this economic crisis we're in. I'm not really good at that. When someone informs me of a social or relational or personal situation with which they're struggling, I tend to be more preoccupied with figuring out how the condition came about and what sorts of large cultural trends it represents than I am in helping a person live through it. Now, some of this tendency to defend myself is a concern for preventing a recurrence of the crises, but more of it's what might seem to be a kind of social scientific interest in how certain things happen, whether or not they can be prevented. But whatever, I've never been accused of having the gift of encouragement. So offering comfort to someone whose 401k has evaporated or who's lost their job is not the sort of thing I do very well, much as I'd like to be able to do it. Now, the second reason against inviting me here to lecture on this topic is that I know next to nothing about economics, okay? Although I've wondered over the past few years if there aren't lots of people with PhDs in economics or national reputations as financial consultants who've been wondering what the precise extent of their understanding of economics is. If you're so smart, why has your bank failed? Now, I'm certainly not in a position to comment, if anyone is, on possible economic or financial improprieties that occasion the suffering of many people and continues to, and which will likely have long-range social and political consequences that we're just beginning to understand. So I've got 2 strikes against me before I even step into the batter's box, but I hope that what I have to say will be useful nonetheless, because the more I read and thought about the issue of this economic crisis in context, the more I realized that my experience in developing a theology of culture and in exploring the specific history of modern Western culture, the more confident I became that I did have something to say in this context. For the last 35 years, I've committed most of my time to exploring the dynamics of contemporary cultural life with a special interest in 2 big questions. First, what might the cultural lives of Christians look like if we lived them in ways that were consistent with a biblical account of human nature and human flourishing? And second, for what reasons did modern Western culture take the shape that it has? I've researched and discussed these questions with hundreds of remarkable historians, theologians, novelists, philosophers, sociologists, and yes, even a few economists. And I've marveled at the remarkable extent to which scholars from various disciplines and from a range of political and religious viewpoints agree on what defines the nature of the distinctively modern. I'm continually more and more convinced as well that what makes modern culture modern is also what makes it problematic for faithful Christians. That is, for believers who are striving to order their understanding and their living in continuity with the teaching of the Word of God and with almost 2,000 years of Christian reflection on that teaching. As I've read a number of commentators over the past year or so about the decisions made and the motivations sustained in various economic institutions, both, not just financial institutions and corporate institutions, but governmental institutions as well, I've heard many echoes of themes familiar to me in my general study of modern culture. And there's a good reason for this. The shape of our economic life, the assumptions, the explicit beliefs, and the practices and institutions are all instances of modern culture more generally. Economic life is not a sphere of experience somehow sealed off from the rest of our cultural experience. The goals and motivations and beliefs and activities that drive our economic institutions shape other institutions as well: the arts, education, journalism, agriculture, technology, politics, even religion and the family. What I want to try to do tonight, and what I think I am qualified to do, is threefold. First, to encourage you to consider a larger and more comprehensive definition of economics than is conventionally the case. Second, to try to get you to begin to think about economics as a subset of culture generally, to see how the patterns of modern culture are reflected in economic life. And third, to encourage you to think about ways in which the lives of Christ's disciples should evidence a different set of patterns of economic behavior. Whatever the personal financial consequences of our current economic problems have been or will be in your life, let me suggest that such a dramatic reconfiguration of major corporate and financial institutions should be regarded as an opportunity for all of us, a wake-up call, if you will, to examine some of the basic assumptions that shape how we think and act concerning economic life. What has happened is not just a story of greed and bad regulation. I think it's a chapter in a larger story of the confusion of the modern West. Now, let me say something to set aside worries that some of you may have. Nothing I say tonight should be understood, this is almost like a warning label here. Every time I get email from people who work at banks or insurance agents, you always see a little thing at the bottom. Nothing I say tonight should be understood as advocacy or criticism for any specific government program. I don't know enough to make those kinds of assertions. As I said earlier, I'm really interested in two big questions. How might the lives of believers properly reflect what we believe? And secondly, how did the West get in the shape that it's in? To the extent that I offer any kind of prescriptions, it's for believers, individually and communally.